Welcome back. Right at the tail end of my outro last episode, darling Randy dropped another psychic shit part in my lap that I should probably do something about, because it's starting to chafe. After reviewing the situation, it looks like this is going to be another open and shut case for door cheese, but Goose is still suffering from the effects of wake-up exposure, so I'm gonna hold off on engaging until after that wears off. In the meantime, I have him stick around the base, doing light work and relaxing to keep him stable in the face of a hefty set of mood debuffs. A couple days of nothing much, and Goose wakes up feeling as fit as a fiddle, and also mildly psychotic due to the increasing strength of the psychic droner, but we're working on that. I get Goose set up with his old friend the bolt action, and make sure to shut the door when I move him out, since in theory that will redirect any potential raiders to attack the active mechanoid swarms instead of letting them steal Goose's hoard of stuff. Also, for those of you wondering why math matters, I whipped out the Pythagorean theorem to measure the firing range of Goose's bolt action here. See, geometry is useful. After my bunker's set up, sniping mechanoids is a time-consuming but pretty bog-standard and risk-free operation. With its guardians down, the ship is then cleaned up soon after, netting me another advanced component in the process. I'm not entirely sure what's going on with Randy at the moment either. He seems to enjoy the show, because he rewarded my effort with a delivery of iguana meat. But when I wrap it up, I'm immediately hit with another psychic droning event, so maybe he was just sad that the fun ended so early. Putting aside for a moment my musings on the mental state of someone who dresses like this for his day job, I have Goose do some hauling, clean out a lynx that has been snooping around the map, and purchase some medicine off of another trade ship for a few components and leftover weapons salvaged from raids. This gets me up to 6 industrial tier medicine, which is enough to run the course of nearly any kind of treatable illness, and that, combined with Goose's decent medical skills, has me feeling pretty good about his chances if he gets sick. Note to self, do not question the jacket. Never question the jacket. Randy likes his jacket, and will send the worst possible kinds of raiders to harass you if you insult it. Seizures are problematic. They have mortars and will bombard you at extreme ranges to force you to engage them in, effectively, an open area. As a general rule, my strategy to dealing with them is either counter-bombardment or deploying a highly mobile sniper team to take potshots at them in a running kite maneuver until they get tired of lobbing shells at you and engage like normal people. This doesn't really work when you have one colonist. I do have two things going for me, though. The first is that my actual base has a very small footprint. A solid 2/3 of it is just farm box and turbine space, which will make it very hard for raiders to target the expensive bits. Mortar bombardment is both highly inaccurate and highly indiscriminate. I have, for example, seen the AI target pieces of wall with no structural or security value whatsoever. Somewhat in line with that is my second advantage. AI mortar batteries will target other hostile factions, which in my case happens to include the 2 pods of mechanoids and a ship chunk. I don't know if sleeping mechs count as a valid target, but the live ones absolutely do, and the second and third shots from the mortars are handily lobbed towards the pet mechanoids, and not my base at all. My approach for cleaning these nutters out is very similar to how I took out ship chunks. I make a bunker on the absolute furthest edge of my bolt action's range that only barely lets me get a line of sight on one of the mortar emplacements. This is just close enough for Goose to get a bead on the pawn in charge of firing the mortar, which is a job that, like idling, prevents them from returning fire with their equipped weapon. When pawns aren't manning the mortar, I can also have Goose fire on the mortar itself, which will force returning pawns to repair it before they can fire shells from it again. I will repeat this process until enough raiders are downed that they switch from sieging to attacking, and when that happens, all of my base is blocked by doors, and Goose will be hiding in a bunker, so the raiders should instead go for the mechanoids, allowing me to ambush them from behind to pick them off before they do significant damage to my robot buddies. This plan goes fantastically. Goose does take a bit of heat, and my base does end up losing a bit of wall to a lucky mortar shot, but for the most part the batteries are too busy missing the mechanoids or aiming at random chunks of structure to cause any damage. After dropping a couple raiders and damaging several more, they get tired of my little games and, as predicted, head straight for the mechanoids, allowing me to pepper their behinds in lead. Siegers, in return for their extremely annoying combat style, give heaping scads of loot. In addition to whatever gear and medicine the pawns were equipped with, I net myself 2 mortar batteries, a reinforced barrel which I can use to craft another one once I've researched them, a handful of shells, and some packaged survival meals. More important than all of that, though, is what they constructed their defensive emplacements out of. Wood. For the most part, wood isn't terribly necessary in the base game, but there are a couple structures that require it, and one of them is a butchering table. Without this table, I take a 30% production hit to the efficiency of all butchering bills, which reduces hide and leather output substantially over the long term. There is so much good stuff here that even caravan cheesing isn't enough to let me hold all of it, so I end up spending a couple more days micromanaging the looting process to ensure I get everything useful out of the battlefield. The one advantage of this playstyle is that toxic fallout, which is normally a serious problem that requires immediate and drastic action in an agrarian colony, has literally zero effect on me other than marginally increasing the defensibility of my position. Raiders have to come to me, after all, and now they can do it while being coated in a stylish fine green patina of hazardous waste. Even better. Unfortunately, mechanoids don't much care about toxic fallout, and my next raid of them is the absolute worst case scenario. 6 scythers. Scythers are bad. My defenses are mostly turret-based, since in any mechanoid raid it's going to be far more effective for Goose to be using EMPs than it will be for him to be using a damage-dealing weapon. This means that all of my damage will be coming from stationary, squishy weapon emplacements with very low alpha damage and very little armor penetration, making the relatively high armor, high DPS, high effective HP melee unit that is a scyther a terrible matchup for them. My strategy for this, as with everything, is caravan cheese. Lots and lots of caravan cheese. In addition to letting you move lots of things around, caravan cheese will let you hold multiple weapons that can be fairly easily switched out by dropping them on the floor. I do this with a chain shotty, my SMG, and my set of EMP grenades, so that I will have them all immediately available if I want to switch out. The first pod of a single scyther is taken out without too much trouble, but already issues have started to show. As expected, the damage output of my turrets is very limited. More problematic is that I forgot how terrible chain shotguns are even in close quarters, and in retrospect I would have been better off just using my SMG. This opinion is further reinforced when pods 2 and 3 merge together into a group of 5 attacking about all at once. I am able to stun the first 2 scythers to ensure clean engagement on them, but the ones after that get stuck, making timing the next EMP to stun them in the middle of the farm box is nearly impossible. I partially land it, and am able to follow up with another. The real problem starts when I prove that I'm unable to maintain a high enough DPS to finish off the ones I stunned initially. Most of them attack the turrets and are either blown up when the turrets explosively detonate, or are shot to pieces. Most. One of them goes for Goose, and Goose is too close to pull back, forcing him into melee combat. Goose then bails, dip, duck, dodging, and diving scyther attacks all the while, and manages to loop around and bring his tail into the turret line again, which slows the scyther down but doesn't stop it. Eventually he's able to lose aggro to a turret, re-equip his EMPs, and then stun and shoot down the last one. The end result? 6 dead scythers, but also 3 destroyed mini-turrets. A net loss of a little bit of steel and a single component, and Goose tired but otherwise unharmed. I got very, very lucky here. Lucky isn't going to cut it once raid sizes go up again, so once Goose recovers, he immediately gets put back to work shoring up defenses, modifying the design of the farm box, and engaging in what min-maxers in the Rimworld community refer to as wealth management. As I see it, I have 2 options for improving my security. I can make more defenses, or I can attract less aggressive raids. More defenses is easy, and I did some research on how raid strength is calculated, so less aggressive raids may also be possible. First, prisoners don't contribute to raid size, so that's one misconception busted. Of the things that do, several of them are not something I can control, but for the most part I've been pretty good about keeping a tight grip on the ones that I can. The number of pawns and animals contributes, so I'm doing good by keeping my setup small, and while my wealth has started to get a little bit out of hand, there are practical limits to how small I can keep my operation, while also ensuring that I'm able to progress the game. From what I can tell, my best bet is using cached resources to build lots of things, since building wealth is calculated at 50% strength, and if I'm going to need those things eventually anyway, it makes sense to not have the raw resources jacking up my colony wealth. I get my repairs done, and do that, and spend a day or two researching towards my next big project, but I'm accosted by yet another mechanoid raid. This time, it's a much more balanced assortment of 2 scythers, 2 pikemen, and a lancer, and as before, the ranged ones I'm not terribly worried about. The real risk are the scythers. Once again, I am proven right in my assessment. The sandbags, while great at stopping ranged fire, give scythers cover from Goose, making it nearly impossible for him to line up a shot once the scythers get into the turret line. This one design mistake means that a single scyther was given basically free rein to stab down 4 of my turrets, despite presumably standing on top of the sandbags in full view of Goose. Other than that very expensive problem that cost me the rest of my steel to fix, the rest of the raid goes off without a hitch. Of course, that does nothing for the next one that pops before Goose even has a chance to fully recover from the last one. This is the problem with Randy. On average, he sends about as many raids as the other storytellers, but he is far less predictable about it, and that results in nonsense scenarios where you're hit with 2 or 3 back-to-back raids all at once without any recovery time. At least these are tribals instead of mechanoids, so it's nice to have some variety. You've gotta be joking me. So, ironically, this doesn't really change the plan. I don't want to burn my mechanoids just yet, for reasons that seem pretty obvious, but these 2 raids happened close enough together that I can get away with just bouncing the threat between me and the ancient danger to get a hefty number of shots in on them without ever risking mechanoids. Hopefully. Goose is probably not going to like how long this takes, but he's just going to have to learn to live with it. The first thing I do is aggro a convenient thrumbo that wandered through the area. It isn't gonna be able to take out the raiders by itself, but it will make an excellent distraction and can easily take out a few melee units that they send against it. This thing ends up doing quite a lot to hold the attention of both raids, since tribal weapons aren't terribly good at dealing with armored targets, and that lets Goose drop a couple pawns for free. As annoying as it is to micromanage, the old-fashioned door bait strategy works a treat. Raiders prefer attacking Goose over the mechanoids, but will redirect the mechanoids if they can't see Goose, resulting in this hilarious comedy of back and forth pathing with Goose laying down fire all the while. Eventually, he triumphs over both raids simultaneously, though not without him taking a hit to the leg, which later ends up getting infected. I'm not terribly concerned about infection at this point, and with bed rest, good medicine, and a high doctoring stat, Goose will be back on his feet in no time. As something of a consolation prize for the now 4 raids back-to-back that he sent, Randy's offers me a second colonist. I accept them for now, just in case Goose needs help, but don't plan on keeping them. Well, originally, I didn't plan on keeping them, but it might be time to revise that opinion. I did some back-of-the-napkin math, and if I'm understanding raid scaling correctly, adding a second colonist isn't going to substantially increase the strength of my raids. That effect is most notable in extremely early parts of the game since my wealth is so low, but now that I have more stuff, most of my raid strength is coming just from my material value, not my pawn count. Morgan is female, and is close enough in age to Goose that there's a decent chance of them forming a relationship, which is basically a free mood buff for both parties as long as neither of them beef it. Morgan also has a decent stat and passion spread that would help free up Goose from having to do a bunch of stuff he isn't particularly good at, and to top it all off, she has solid traits. Kind is a little bit meh in my experience, but I consider Iron-Willed to be the single strongest non-context dependent trait in the game, and colonists with it are almost always instant recruits for me, regardless of how good or bad they are at something. I think we can keep her. Normally, this is where I would then go pick a random member name to use as a nickname for Morgan, but unfortunately for you folks, you got sniped by Ducky, who was watching over my shoulder when I was recording this, and when I pointed out the close-ish age gap would increase romance chances, she stole naming rights. I would apologize, but this is far from the most significant sacrifice I've made in the name of maintaining a healthy partnership, so welcome to the colony, Ducky. Ducky isn't perfect, however, and she has some medical concerns that are going to need to be resolved. She has asthma, which in Rimworld can be fixed by transplanting some lungs, which Goose should be more than capable of sourcing, but she also has a wake-up dependency which needs to be kicked. After a couple of days trying to wean her off, she falls off the wagon and starts binging on the stuff, forcing me to jail her to try and limit her exposure, and losing all the progress that she made in the process. Off to a really great start there, Ducky. In fact, just to make sure, I sell all of the wake-up and some other random junk I have to a trader in exchange for a few components, because there's no sense in risking a second relapse. With Ducky handling all the research, Goose time is freed up to take care of other important work, such as rebuilding my stockpiles of steel and upgrading the farm box with another 5 turrets. Another interesting factoid I learned about raid calculations is that turrets don't actually increase the strength of the raids beyond contributing to colony wealth. I'm not sure if they used to and it was changed, or if that belief is the result of some random hallucination I've been nursing for several years, but learning this substantially changes my approach regarding defenses. I don't plan on relying on them to stop raiders, since there are raid types that are entirely invalidating traditional farm box designs coming just around the corner, but in the early game when I'm still fighting against raid scaling, they are going to be an invaluable source of bullet sponges. My farm box design concept gets put to the test soon after it's finished by a relatively conservative raid of 2 lancers and 2 pikemen. This raid size, in my mind, firmly vindicates my choice to pick up a second colonist, since it's clear that Ducky's presence is not going to be the instant doom that I thought it would be. Since all the units are ranged and aren't termites or centipedes, the fight is quite predictable. I let the mechs come in and aggro to the turrets before dropping an EMP on them and opening up with Goose and Ducky. Ducky comports herself well, despite suffering from her unfilled wake-up need, and with 2 colonists, my effective DPS output is high enough that I don't even need to turn the turrets on to help me out. All in all, a very promising situation. Randy seems to be running out of novel problems to throw my way, and ends up recycling an old fan favorite. Yet another psychic droner ship, this time with a scyther and 2 pikemen. We have a consistent solution for dealing with these, and Goose is, by this point, a flipping phenomenal shot, so scrapping them will be easy. Randy is being a raging hemorrhoid, though, and decides to send a second raid on top of it, just because he can. This raid of yet more mechanoids consists of a bunch of unproblematic ranged units and 2 termites, a mechanoid build that I personally find to be rather poorly balanced. They are essentially mobile sapper units, and have a weak ranged attack in exchange for causing massive structural damage. This would normally be a fair trade-off if it wasn't for the obscenely overtuned ranged structure damage, and the end result is a weapon that will 1 or 2 shot any static fortification with no real chance of retaliation from defenders. Put it simply, these things are property damage on legs, suffer none of the drawbacks that grenadiers have regarding limited range, and cleaning up after them is a pain. Their one saving grace is that they aren't terribly tanky, and with a careful application of large quantities of bullets, the mechs go down without too much excessive property damage. Now that little stupid distraction is out of the way and the base is patched up, it's time to take out the droner. Plink, blink, plonk, smash. No more ship. Good news! Randy finally chills the heck out for a few days, and during that break, Ducky manages to kick her wake-up habit. Congratulations, Ducky! Welcome to the wonderful world of being a functioning colony member. Well, once you get out of your mental break, there you go. Here's hoping you stay that way. An exotic goods trader comes by offering to sell a medical skill trainer. I would really like to purchase this for Ducky, since she lacks either a passion or a trait that will let her learn medical tending quickly, but even after dropping a thrombo that was wandering around in the area, I do not have enough for it. I could sell some things to make the difference, but I kind of need what I have, so I just opt to get a bunch of silver from the exchange. Hello, everyone. I'd like you to meet Sass. Sass is not terribly good as colonists go, but will be joining on a provisional basis to help me build up my reserves of steel. Since they are temporary, they aren't going to be getting a member name, but I have been kind of scraping the bottom of the steel mill here, so I'm glad to have the help. In that time, Ducky finishes up research into chem fuel production, which is the Rimworld equivalent of petroleum through organic matter synthesis. This is useful for a couple of different technologies, but most relevant to me is that it gives me the ability to create high explosives, which is a stunningly effective way of dealing damage when used on stationary targets, such as, EMP-stunned mechanoids. More on that in a moment, though, since it seems some siegers want to make their presence known again. This is a long, brutal slugfest of a fight. Ducky and Sass aren't really good enough shots to benefit from being placed in a sniper line yet, so I have them stay at home to beat out the inevitable fires that will result from incendiary bombardment, and direct Goose to once again take the lead on door cheese. The fight starts off by Goose closing the distance to the sieging team, only to immediately start taking fire before getting his fortifications up. This results in one exceedingly lucky shot hitting him, going through his bullet-resistant flak armor, and obliterating his stomach in one bullet. Unlike in real life, this doesn't really have any substantial long-term health effects beyond a metabolism debuff and making Goose immune to gutworms. So, if you have to choose an organ to lose in Rimworld, the stomach is definitely the one, but it's still not great that I'm taking damage. After Goose patches up his spigot and returns fire, a second problem becomes apparent. This one stone blob is in the way of my line of fire on the mortar manning position. While it isn't the end of the world, it is incredibly inconvenient, and forces me to find angles elsewhere to lay down fire. After some extensive back and forth, complete with a random trade ship that I have Ducky take the phone for, Goose's unrelenting bolt fire finally gets the raiders irritated enough to try a direct assault, and he picks them off from behind soon after. Good job, Goose. You are a hero once again, despite not really having the stomach for the task. Randy isn't done, and has finally perfected the art of the 1-2 punch. A man-hunting pack of megasloths force my colonists to stay inside, and a psychic ship with lots of meat on it crashes down and starts irritating all of the female colonists. Since I can't really get people out of my base to take care of it, I have no option other than to wait it out. Since I have 3 colonists, I decide to make a door cheese design that has 3 firing positions, but after reviewing the footage I can definitively say that it was not worth it for Sass. Sass has a shooting skill of 2, which is so low that hitting a barn door is considered something of a miracle. I don't think she landed a single shot during the entire engagement. Goose and Ducky, on the other hand, comported themselves excellently and were able to drop a needler and 2 lancers, and inflict heavy damage on the rest before they had to pull back and take a nap. It takes a whole nother day and night to finish up, but Goose and Ducky soldier on, and are able to clear out the rest of the mechs and beat down the droner as dawn breaks on the day after. And then not a second after their heads hit the pillow, another Manhunter pack shows up. Good grief. Since I'm trapped inside with nothing to do and a couple of decent miners idling, I think it's time to have them get started on the next phase of my plan. I'm living next to a giant mountain. This affords me with significant defensive utility, both as a source of free walls and as an opportunity for me to make a hardened defensive position that will allow me to recruit and train up pawns to launch raids on settlements across the world. Mountain bases have a couple of upsides and downsides. The upsides are they cannot be bombarded with mortar fire. Mortars landing on thick rock roofs will simply disappear without doing any damage, rendering them entirely immune. They also are immune to drop pod raids that land inside your colony, and for a colony that currently relies so heavily on turret-based defenses, this is quite important. The downsides are that most people hate living underground, and cabin fever will be a constant -9 moodlet that I'm going to have to manage. Oh, and giant insects. Anytime you have exposed thick rock roofing and the temperature under it is greater than negative 17 degrees centigrade, insect hives have a chance of spawning. Depending on where they spawn, insects can range from actively beneficial to incredibly dangerous, but I much prefer not to mess with them at all, and usually make sure this happens by constructing banks of air conditioning units to freeze the entire base. In a climate this cold, that's not going to be terribly difficult, but it will make the pawns rather unhappy. To power this and all of the other goodies I'm going to need to make, I finally get around to installing a geothermal generator, which once again depletes my steel reserve to basically nothing. I'm also more than a little bit fed up with Sass by this point. She has spent a solid 50% of her time being useless, having mental breaks, and driving up my colony wealth, so her days are numbered. Several more days of hard labor sees her finish up with most of the easily accessible steel on the map and make some solid headway on the main tunnel that I'll be using for my underground operation. For now, this space isn't seeing a whole lot of use, but once it gets a bit more cleaned up, I will be rotating all of my non-essential operations into it. This is interrupted by a raid, but having seen what's coming for me, I'm not terribly concerned. It goes off without a hitch, with the only permanent loss coming from my inability to remember things. I forgot to reset Sass's treatment options, and Goose uses a Glitterworld medicine to patch up a bruise on her shoulder. This is deeply annoying, but it's entirely my fault. Normally I have a mod that adjusts what medicine can be used to treat what kind of injuries, but it hasn't updated to 1.5, and the old version was being a bit buggy, so I had to uninstall it. When I did that, it reset all my trading priorities to their defaults, which for some unfathomable reason starts out with all colonists using Glitterworld medicine, even if their only injury is a paper cut. Since I have all this free space now, I have Goose get started moving all the junk into the bunker. The only really valuable part of this is that it protects it in case of aerial bombardment, but given the number of times Randy's tried to mess with me this run, I still feel like it might be a wise decision. Sass, meanwhile, has calmed down a bit. She isn't really good for anything, but she is okay at rock breaking, and I'm going to need to do a whole lot of that from here on out real soon, so even though her days are numbered, that number has for now been temporarily increased. Don't push me, Sass. Yep. This right here is why I was moving all my stuff over. Thanks, Randy. This is siege number 3, for those who are counting, and the plan is exactly the same. Get Goose out there doing the snipey thing, everyone else stays at home to put out fires, and, you know, do actual work. Mortar bombardment is really only problematic when you have lots of valuable or flammable stuff clumped up, so once my stockpile's been transferred over, I'm basically entirely immune to it and just have to worry about well-aimed shells hitting a colonist. The siege, though long and drawn out, goes off without any problems. Notable loot, in addition to all the usual sieging stuff, includes a flak vest for Ducky, a set of frag grenades that will be an excellent upgrade for Goose to use during mechanoid raids, and a volunteer organ donor who I can, borrow lungs from. I can't get a stomach for some reason, but there are bionic equivalents that I will be equipping all my pawns with anyway, so that one isn't much of a problem. My research room mining project finishes off right as an orbital trader calls in to deliver me more sweet, sweet goodies. After going through the usual exercise in self-flagellation when it comes to not purchasing every book in their stock, I net myself a bunch more components and raw resources and decide that it's time to say goodbye to Sass. While I could just icebox her, she has somehow managed to make a positive impression on Goose and Ducky, so instead I opt to dress her up in the finest tainted clothing that I can find and banish her from the colony. This avoids most of the negative moodlets that come from various options of removing a pawn, and since she's a friend, it would be much more cost-effective to just banish her than it would be to arrange an accident. I will, however, be looking for a solid replacement or two, since it's definitely time to start expanding my colony. The next big project is getting my research room / hospital set up. There is actually a lot of work involved in this. Walls need to be smoothed, rock has to be hauled, sterile tiles need to be laid, furnishings, lighting, and the research bench all need to be put into place. During this time, Randy does try to give me a colonist, though the chemical fascination trait is an immediate no-go for me. While it can be decent if you have a steady supply of chemicals to feed the afflicted pawn's dependency of choice, they have a obnoxious habit of uncontrollably binging on things that they really shouldn't be messing with, and that tends to be a massive pain in the rear end if you are carefully rationing your supplies of the stuff. They get banished immediately. In apology, Randy gives me some more yaks. Like, Randy, enough with the yaks. This is like the 12th set of yaks you have sent me. I cannot eat any more yak meat. After a few remarkably chill days, Goose finishes up with a research room, much to the delight of Ducky, who will be spending most of her life in it from now on. Normally, I would end the episode here, but it seems that Randy did the mind-reading thing again and tried to drop another psychic ship on me during the outro. He succeeded. I will give him that. But in his haste to drop the ship, he sort of forgot a few things. Like, you know, all the mechanoids that are defending it. At first I thought this was maybe a new mechanic added in 1.5, but no, it's not an ambush, it just spawned without any defenders. I've never seen this before. Whatever. Thanks for the free stuff, Randy. And with that out of the way and a fresh new horde of angry animals wandering outside my walls, I will bid you adieu. Thank you for your time, and I hope you have enjoyed.